Legal trials. Passover through the ages. We're going to be talking about the illegal trials, Passover through the ages. We talked about the fast of the firstborn in the previous teaching, and that was about Yeshua's Last Supper, which occurred on Nisan 13, a day before the official Passover sacrifice on Nisan 14. At the conclusion of the meal, the tradition was to sing Hallel Psalms 113 to 118, which are all about praising God. Matthew 26:30. After singing the Hallel, they went out to the Mount of Olives. This was the beginning of the fast of the firstborn. Yeshua was fasting when he was beaten to near death and then carried the cross to Calvary while he was fasting. No food, no water. The Mount of Olives was directly across from the Jerusalem temple. When Yeshua made his entry into Jerusalem riding on a donkey on Lamb Selection Day, Nisan 10, he came through the Mount of Olives. Luke 19 talks about it. He prayed there and he slept there often. Luke 21 says that. It was where he was delivering his final teaching about the end of the age in Matthew 24. This is where he would later ascend into heaven. Mount of Olives says that in Acts 1. And where he will be returning to earth, Zechariah 14. The Mount of Olives is central. It's central to the scriptures. Luke 21:37. So during the days Yeshua was teaching in the temple, but in the nights he went out and stayed on the Mount of Olives. Luke 22:39. And Yeshua came out of the temple and went as usual to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. So in our next picture, I want you to take a careful look at the Mount of Olives. You see on the left side in a rectangle it says temple. And directly across from there, directly across, is the Garden of Gethsemane and the Mount of Olives. And then there's arrows going over the garden and under the garden. One of them is heading to Bethpage, the other one heads to Bethany. Okay? But you'll notice as you look at the words that are sort of up and down between those two areas. The dividing line is the Kidron Valley. So if they were in the temple area, they would have to go through the valley, which is quite a hike down, and then have to turn around and go back up to the Mount of Olives. So it was an up and down to get across there. So this Gethsemane, the word means oil press. So this garden was on the west side of the Mount of Olives, where the olives were pressed to extract the oil. Yeshua was being pressed emotionally and spiritually as he agonized about what was coming. Mark 14 says, then they come to a place whose name is Gethsemane. And Yeshua says to his disciples, sit here while I pray. He takes with him Peter, Jacob, and John, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. He's being pressed. And he tells them, my soul is deeply grieved, even to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch. Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and began praying that, if possible, this hour might pass him by. And he was saying, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. Now we've got to remember, man's downfall was in a garden, and man's redemption began in a garden. 1 Corinthians 15:45, it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living soul. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. There was a transfer and exchange that took place in the garden from death to life. So in the Collins Dictionary, if you were to look up the word Eden or Eden, it says any delightful place or state, a paradise, or the Hebrew would say pleasure or delight. And Gethsemane, if you look that up, it says any scene or occasion of agony. The Aramaic is Gethsemanin, or oil press, because such a press was actually located there. So Yeshua suffered agony to redeem man back to a delightful state. There were angels in the garden, the first garden and the second garden. Genesis 3:22-24. Then Adonai Elohim said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. So now in case he stretches out his hand and takes also from the tree of life and eats and lives forever." Adonai Elohim sent him away from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken. And he expelled the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he had cherubim dwelling along with the whirling sword of flame to guard the way to the tree of life. So the cherubim blocked the disobedient man from the Garden of Eden. But in the Garden of Gethsemane, an angel ministered to the obedient Yeshua. You see how there's the contrast? He goes from death to life, from one garden to the other garden. Luke 22:41-43, Yeshua got on his knees saying, "Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will but yours be done." And an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And in his anguish he was praying fervently, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling down on the ground. One angel in the first garden, another angel in the second garden. Death in the first garden, life in the second garden. There's a term in the medical world called hematidrosis. It means sweating blood. Now remember, Luke, who wrote the Gospels, he was a physician. He would have noted these things as a physician. He noted Yeshua's physical symptoms on that night. He said, Luke 22, and in anguish he was praying fervently, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling down on the ground. If you look up that term, hematidrosis, on webmd.com, here's what it says. It's a rare medical condition that causes you to ooze or sweat blood from your skin when you're not cut or injured. It is blood vessels in the skin that break open. The blood inside them may get squeezed out through the sweat glands. It seems to be caused by extreme distress or fear, such as facing death, torture, or severe ongoing abuse. So when it says in the scripture that Yeshua sweat blood, what is it telling us? He was under severe agony. Agony. Mark 14:37-42. Yeshua comes and finds them all sleeping. He's in the garden. He's going through the worst time of his life, and his friends are all sleeping. He tells Peter, "Simon, you're asleep? Couldn't you watch for 1 hour? 1 hour, that's all I asked." Again, he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And he again found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy. They didn't know what to answer him. He comes a third time and says, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough! The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is being delivered into the hands of sinners. Get up, let's go. Look, my betrayer is near." Remember, we talked about that term, Son of Man. It's referring to Daniel 7:13, the Son of Man who would be going to the Ancient of Days and be given all dominion. He was the Son of Man about to be betrayed. This is John's account of what happened in that evening. John 18:1-3. Yeshua was with his disciples across the Kidron Valley, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas also knew the place, because Yeshua was often had often met there with his disciples. So Judas, having taken a band of soldiers and some officers from the ruling Kohanim and Pharisees, comes there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Let's look at that term, the band of soldiers. That's 600 men. 600 soldiers to come for a man who is peaceful. 600. It's a cohort of Roman soldiers. It's 1/10 of a legion. A legion is 6,000 soldiers, and a band of soldiers is 600 soldiers. That's how many showed up. Who are the ruling Kohanim and the Pharisees? Well, you know who they are. They're the corrupt guys who decided they're going to plot to kill him. They're the temple guard who arrested Yeshua, but they had no authority under Jewish law to execute a death penalty. Remember that. They could not execute a death penalty. So they were going to have to go to Rome for that. Okay? The 600 soldiers would give the appearance that they were capturing a dangerous criminal. Here's a man who has no accusations, no charges against him, and 600 men show up. Then there's this warm and loving kiss from Judas. In that day, a warm and loving kiss was a common sign of discipleship. You would kiss your disciples, they would kiss you back. Mark 14, 43 to 48. 43, to 48. Right away, while Yeshua was still speaking, Judas comes up, one of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs from the ruling Kohanim, Torah scholars, and elders. Why are they carrying clubs? They're the legal guys. What are they doing carrying all these things? Now his betrayer has given them a signal saying, the one I kiss, he's the one. Seize him and lead him away under guard. Judas drew near to Yeshua and said, Rabbi, and kissed him. Yeshua said to them, have you come out with swords and clubs to capture me as you would against a revolutionary? I mean, seriously, guys. Did you need to bring all these people? Luke 22:48. But Yeshua said to him, Judas, with a kiss you betray the Son of Man? John 18:4-8. Then Yeshua, knowing all the things coming upon him, went forward. He said to them, who are you looking for? Yeshua HaNazrati, they answered him. That means Yeshua of Nazareth. Yeshua tells them, I am. Why didn't he say, that's me? No, he said, I am. Now, Judas, the one betraying him, was also standing with him. So when Yeshua said to them, I am, they drew back and fell to the ground. Why? He just said, I am. So again, he asked, who are you looking for? And they said, Yeshua HaNazrati. Yeshua answered, I told you, I am. So here's why they got upset. Exodus 3:14, when Moses and God are having the encounter at the bush, the burning bush. Moses says, who am I supposed to tell sent me? This is the answer. I am who I am. Then he answered, you are to say to Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, I am has sent me. I am. So when they asked Yeshua, are you the one we're looking for? I am. And they went, what? What? What did you just say? I am? And they all fell down, shocked. John 18:12-13. Then the band of soldiers, 600 of them, with the captain and the officers of the Judeans, seized Yeshua and tied him up. They led him first to Annas. Remember? He's the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the Kohen Gadol that year. Annas isn't even in charge. Caiaphas is. Luke 3:1-3 mentions this high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas back when John the Baptist was preaching about an immersion of repentance. In the Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus mentions Annas. He was appointed by the governor. He was the first high priest of the newly Roman province of Judea. 9 years later, he's kicked out in 15 CE. The procurator of Judea removed him from office, and the son-in-law Caiaphas handled the priestly duties. Annas remained an influence over Caiaphas and his decisions. So Yeshua was brought to Annas first. Matthew 26, 56 to 57. Then all the disciples fled, abandoning him. Now those who had seized Yeshua led him away to Caiaphas, the Kohen Gadol, where the Torah scholars and elders had gathered. Peter was following him from a distance and as far as the courtyard of the Kohen Gadol. Peter was watching. He was trying to be invisible, but he was trailing along. After going inside, he was sitting with the guards to see the outcome. He wants to know what's going to happen. All the rest of the disciples have fled, right? They left. They took off running. Here's Peter. Doesn't want anybody to know he's there, but he's there. They walked a few miles to the courtyard in Caiaphas' home, and they began their questioning. By law, a trial was supposed to be in the open, in a public place, and in the daylight. This was an illegal location, an illegal trial, an illegal time, and it was rendered with a rushed, improper questioning and no witnesses. Okay, let's go back again and look at our diagram of the area. So the temple now is sitting in almost the middle toward the top. The rectangle says temple. To the right of that is the Garden of Gethsemane. And then all the way to the left, you see a rectangle that's Herod's place. And then going to the right of Herod's place is a smaller rectangle. That's the Hasmonean Palace, where Pilate was. Okay? So if you follow the arrows, start at the Garden of Gethsemane, all the way on the right, that little box up there. Garden of Gethsemane. Follow the arrow that goes from the upper area down to the bottom of the diagram. He has to pass the Kidron Valley. He's been fasting, remember? He has to pass there. He has to go down across the Kidron Valley. See the arrow that comes up again? That takes him to the house of Annas. Then there's another little arrow that goes back, and now he has to go to the house of Caiaphas. Then he has to turn around and go back to Herod's place. Then he goes over to the Hasmonean Palace to the right. Then he goes back to Herod's place. You see all the arrows? They have him running around all over the city. He's without food and without water as they're doing this. And 600 men are following. What a sight that was. Can you imagine if 600 soldiers went through your neighborhood? Would you be kind of wondering what in the world was going on and why that dangerous criminal hadn't been apprehended by now? Okay, that's what they were seeing. The city was seeing 600 soldiers following this man around, up and down, over and across, all over the place. By the time he finally gets to Golgotha, in the upper left corner, he has gone all over the city back and forth. So who is this Sanhedrin? Matthew 26:59. Now the ruling Kohanim and all the Sanhedrin kept trying to get false testimony against Yeshua so they could put him to death. Sanhedrin means assembly or council. That's the 70 elders. We talked about that in the earlier teaching. It's the Supreme Court in Jerusalem, which is referenced in Numbers 11:16, Moses and the 70 elders. All the towns of 120 families or more had a Sanhedrin of 70 elders. The little villages had 3 to 7 judges. Okay, so we know all about that. What about this great Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court? Annas and his son-in-law Caiaphas were part of this great Sanhedrin. They met daily except on the festival days and Shabbat. They met during daylight hours only. The Sanhedrin must judge according to Torah laws. The Sanhedrin must have 2 to 3 witnesses to convict somebody of a crime. Numbers 35:30 says, no one is to be put to death on the testimony of only one witness. But they couldn't even get any witnesses. Remember, nobody charged him with a crime. You don't have a trial if nobody makes a charge. Nobody had made a charge. Mark 14, 55 to 59. Now the ruling Kohanim and all the Sanhedrin kept trying to get evidence against Yeshua so they could put him to death, but they weren't finding any. Many were giving false testimony against him, but the testimony wasn't consistent. Some stood up and began to give false testimony against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another made without hands.'" That's not what he said. Even their testimony did not agree. The witnesses were lying. These were Yeshua's actual words. "Destroy this temple," Yeshua answered, "and in 3 days I will raise it up." He didn't say, "I'm going to destroy the temple." He didn't say that. So they're looking for false testimony. At last, 2 came forward and said, "This fellow said, 'I'm able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.'" Boy, is that ever twisted. The Kohen Gadol stood up and said to Yeshua, "Have you no answer? What's this they're testifying against you?" But Yeshua kept silent. Okay, here's the reason he kept silent. What was the question? What are they testifying against you? They said to Yeshua, "Tell us what the charges are." Against the Torah. He was not allowed to speak anything against himself. That was against the Torah. He could never testify against himself. That's why he was silent. They were trying to trip him up and break the Torah. So they asked him questions in a sneaky kind of way, and he would not answer because he knew what the Torah said. The Kohen Gadol said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are Mashiach ben Elohim." "As you have said," replied Yeshua. "Besides that, I tell you, soon after you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Now you know what the Son of Man means. He's telling them, "I'm the one that was prophesied in Daniel." They got pretty upset. Matthew 26, 65 to 68. Then the Kohen Gadol tore his clothes and said, "Blasphemy! Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, you've heard the blasphemy. What's your verdict?" Wait, they haven't had a trial yet. What happened to the trial? "Guilty," they answered. "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and pounded him with their fists. Others slapped him and demanded, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Which one hit you?" How awful, how disrespectful. The Sanhedrin were acting as if they were the witnesses. Do you understand? They were filing the charges. They were accusing him. But they're supposed to be the judges and the jury. They had already prejudged Yeshua without collecting evidence, without collecting credible witnesses, or conducting a proper trial. You see, this is all illegal. Everything that was done was illegal. Dictionary.com, look up blasphemy. It says it's the crime of assuming to oneself the rights or the qualities of God. They were saying, that's what you're doing, and that's a crime. So, in that day, the Messiah, that term Messiah, was understood to be a political figure who would rescue Israel from the tyranny of Rome. And many had claimed to be Messiah. Many. There were about 50 Messiahs during that time that were saying, "I'm the one who's going to rescue you." So this wasn't a crime to claim you were the Messiah. However, equating yourself with the Son of Man in Daniel's vision was a serious matter because the Son of Man is the one who's given everlasting dominion and sovereignty over all people. And I read that before, Daniel 7:13. "I was watching in the night vision. Behold, one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven." It goes on and says, dominion, glory, and sovereignty were given to him. Everlasting dominion. That's why they were mad. So now we look at the witnesses, if there were any. He is being charged with blasphemy and a crime, and he should have the right to have witnesses testify on his behalf. Well, Peter knew him. Peter was a good witness. He knew him. But no, he wasn't a good witness because he turned out to be a liar. Right? His good witness disappeared. Matthew 26, Peter was sitting in the courtyard. A servant girl came over to him and said, "You also were with Yeshua of Galilee." And he denied it. He denied it. Now he has become a liar. He cannot testify in Yeshua's behalf. He's just been wiped out. He was a witness who could have testified in Yeshua's favor, but now that he denied him and everybody knew it was a lie, he was not a credible witness. So there were no witnesses coming forward to testify against him, and now he had nobody to testify for him either. Without witnesses, without accusers, the Sanhedrin should have dropped the case. Peter denied Yeshua 3 times. The rooster crowed, and so now it's morning. Now we know what time it is in this whole scheme of things. The Sanhedrin was running out of time because the festival was going to be taking place that night. They had to get this done before the festival because they wanted to go to the meal. So here's this book, wonderful book called Who Moved the Stone by Frank Morrison. After hearing of the witnesses, the final rejection of their testimony, the whole conduct of the case began to take an unquestionably illegal form. The illegality consisted in the president of the court attempting to supply, by direct questioning of the prisoner, the necessary grounds for a conviction. You don't ask the prisoner why he's guilty. And the witnesses themselves couldn't even produce that. This was, of course, directly contrary both to the letter and the spirit of the elaborate judicial code by which Jewish law sought to protect the life of a citizen. The power of accusation in a Hebrew trial for life was vested on the witnesses alone. They were the ones who had the testimony to convict. It was the duty of the court to protect the interest of the prisoner in every possible way. Innocent until proven guilty. That's where we get that. It comes from the scriptures. So, what do we have in that midnight until morning? He's gone through a lot. 600 men chasing him around the city. There's the informal questioning. 600 soldiers led him to Annas, the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Then he goes to the Sanhedrin. Now it's formal questioning. Annas sent him and tied him up and sent him off to Pilate, the Roman governor or the prefect of Judea. Then 600 soldiers led Yeshua from Caiaphas to the praetorium. Okay, now he's at Pilate's. John 18:28. And he's hungry. He's probably thirsty. Then they led Yeshua from Caiaphas to the praetorium. It was early. This expression in the Hebrew is meaning the sun had not risen yet. So it was about 5:15 in the morning when they took him to the praetorium. They themselves did not enter the praetorium, so they would not become unclean and might eat the Passover. Oh, they're worried now about being unclean? They're worried about breaking Torah laws when they've been breaking them all night long. The praetorium was a palace for Pontius Pilate. He's a Roman pagan. Therefore, the Jews would not go into a place that was a Gentile location. They would become unclean. So in an unclean state, they could not attend the Passover. So ironically, they were trying to avoid becoming unclean according to the Torah while ignoring the other Torah laws concerning Yeshua's arrest. Okay, this is what the Jewish encyclopedia says about this whole thing. It's an article, The Last Supper. Jewish people writing this, on what grounds Jesus was arrested is not quite clear. Even if he had claimed to be the Messiah, he would have committed no crime, according to Jewish law. It appears that he was taken first to the house of the high priest, where in a hurried consultation, the only evidence against him was apparently an assertion that he could overthrow the temple and replace it with one made without hands. In other words, equivalent to a claim to the messiahship. Jewish Encyclopedia goes on, there could be no question of anything corresponding to a trial taking place on this occasion before the Sanhedrin. Whatever inquest was made must have occurred during the night and outside Jerusalem, for on entering the city, a prisoner would have to be given up to the Roman garrison and cannot have been held before a quorum of the 71 members of the Sanhedrin. So even that, they were breaking the law. Everything they did was breaking the law. And again, Jewish Encyclopedia. It is more probable that the 23 members of the priestly section met informally after he had been seized and elicited sufficient to justify them in their own opinion in delivering him over to the Romans, as likely to cause trouble by his claims to the messiahship, which of course would be regarded by them as rebellion against Rome. Nothing corresponding to a Jewish trial took place. Nothing corresponding to a Jewish trial took place. The Gospels speak in the plural of the high priests who condemned him. That is a seeming contradiction to Jewish law. The Jewish people who are not believers in Yeshua have written this encyclopedia. They're saying that was a totally sham trial. Totally sham. So our summary. On Nisan 13, Yeshua ate the Last Supper before sundown. Judas left the Last Supper early to turn over Yeshua to the Sanhedrin. On Nisan 14 at sundown, the fast of the firstborn was started. Yeshua and his disciples went to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. 600 soldiers showed up as if Yeshua was a dangerous criminal. Judas betrayed Yeshua with a kiss to identify him. No charges against Yeshua had been filed by anyone. Yeshua was tied up and taken to Annas and then Caiaphas. The Sanhedrin tried to collect false witnesses. The Sanhedrin tried every illegal maneuver to build a case. And then they took him to Pilate to finish the deed. And with that, we'll take a break and we'll get to the last section.